So hello and welcome everyone to this special program, and of course a special welcome to Geoff MacCormack, who is joining us today. Geoff is the photographer of the beautiful photographs we have currently in the Wende Museum in our exhibition David Bowie in the Soviet Union. He also was a band member of David Bowie's group from 1973 to 1976, worked as a percussionist, backing singer, background dancer, mime actor, and whatnot. So I'm so pleased, Geoff, to speak with you today. We will focus, of course, on the topic of the exhibition, which is your travel with David Bowie from Yokohama, Japan, by boat and train all the way to Moscow, and then afterwards Warsaw, Berlin, Paris, and finally London. Very spectacular trip that must have been. We will also speak a little bit about your friendship, your personal relation with David Bowie, of course. Today's program will be a 45-minute conversation between the two of us, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. So if you have questions, you can at any point during the program put them under the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. And then before we start, I would like to thank Susan Horowitz and Rick Feldman, who are continuously supporting our programs both on site and online. Very much appreciated, Rick and Susan. And there we go. So Geoff, welcome again. And I wanted to start with a question about a long time ago, because you have known David Bowie since you were both 8 years old. How did that happen, and what kind of boy was David Bowie, as you remember by then?
So it was a geographical thing. We lived in the same town in Bromley in Kent, which right. Was just in Greater London, on the borders of London. So we weren't in central London. And we went to the same school and at 8 years of age. In fact, David is my second oldest friend. My first oldest friend is the artist George Underwood, who I met when I was 4. And George, David, and I all kind of grew up together. We went to we joined the Cub Scouts. That's the scouting, that's scouts before you become a scout, a fully fledged scout, and you're a cub. So we would have done that, and we also sang in the local church choir, St. Mary's, Bromley, and with all the choir regalia that you had, the cassocks and the surplice and the that kind of thing. So those are the activities that in those days you did. And you went to Sunday school as well. So it was, yeah, you did what you were told in those days when we were kids.
Right, which would be very different later on in life, I guess.
No, we always did what we were told.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll see about that. Yeah, how would you describe the young David Bowie? What kind of person was he, and what impression did he make on you?
He was quietish. He wasn't a noisy guy. He was thoughtful. He was keen on reading, and it wasn't until around that time of me meeting him that we discovered rock and roll, which astounded us. It was this force of nature from America that kind of blew us away. You have to remember that when we were kids, we were post-war kids, and we were still on rations. We had ration books. So, and London was pretty grey and miserable, and there were bombed out buildings around, and the country was really rebuilding itself. So to hear and see Little Richard in a sequin suit, in black and white in those days, singing Tutti Frutti or whatever, was completely mind-blowing. It was, it was like some force had been there, of nature had been unleashed upon us, that was had hitherto been kept from us. So his father brought in, his father was attached to a charity, and he was on the entertainment side of that charity and helped raise money for it. It was a charity for kids, Dr. Bernardo's. And so he had access to modern music and American magazines and etc. And so that's what he got for David. So David had information before other kids on the music that was coming from America, and which was really the birth of rock and roll and modern music. Well, you could say Louis Armstrong's.
Which I assume was not exactly the same kind of music you sang at the choir in the church, right? I am actually curious, do you think that there has been any lasting influence of the church songs you did and David Bowie did in his later work?
Yes, I do. In fact, he did a track on one of his last albums called Sue. And I said to him, it reminded me of the Psalms that we sang in the church choir. So we were surrounded by music. Personally, in my home, I had an elder sister who played pop music. I had a much older brother, 9 years older, who played American jazz and jazz. And we were listening to other kinds of music. And then there was my mother played, who was an accompanist, played the piano. So we had a baby grand piano at home. Mm. Then there was the church music. So there was a lot of exposure to all kinds of music.
Right. Yeah, I see. So it was in 1973 that you got a call from David to join his band and travel with him. Can you tell a little bit how that came about? And I'm actually also interested in the way how he asked you to join.
Okay, so I'd been doing bits and bobs of music, and I think I'd made a record that didn't do anything, a disc that didn't do anything, and I've been doing bits and bobs like that. So he knew I sang and whatever. And I'd helped out on things and probably never got paid because I probably never billed for anything. So it was like, for example, Aladdin Sane album. I've got a credit on that. So I went in and I did some vocals on that, and I did the percussion on a track called Panic in Detroit. And as far as I remember, I didn't bill for it because I was just helping out my old pal with a project. So completely unprofessional. So when it came around to him wanting to expand his band, the Spiders from Mars, to a couple of backing vocals, backing vocalists, and a couple of brass and woodwind, he expanded it with two of them, myself and another guy called Hutch, who he'd worked for in a band called Feathers, which was very folky, years before, and Mike Garson on the other side of the stage playing his wonderful piano. And when he decided that that's what he was going to do, he phoned me up and told me I was joining his band. He didn't ask me. He told me I was joining his band. Okay. I was selling advertising space at the time, so I didn't protest.
Right, and you knew that you were in for a very special adventure, I can imagine. Well, and part of that adventure was actually quite special because after the tour went to Japan and the next concert was scheduled in Paris, um, most members of the band took a plane and went to Paris, but the two of you actually didn't do that. You took a boat and a train all the way through with the Trans-Siberian Express. And what was the reason that you didn't take a plane?
Well, you've missed out a bit because we had to get to America.
Well, that's true, of course. Yeah.
So we got a ship, and we had luxury quarters on a lovely ship to go to New York, which we did. And that was my first encounter with America in New York. So that was pretty startling to get off a quiet ship that you've been on for 5 days doing not much into New York. So that was pretty wonderful. And then when we did the tour of America, we had the problem, because he didn't fly, of getting to Japan. So we left Los Angeles and went overnight to San Francisco, met up with Bette Midler, went out with her for the evening, got on a boat again, went to I think Canada, I think we went to and then got back on the boat and went to Hawaii and then to Japan.
Right, right. If I may briefly interrupt you, why was it that he didn't want to fly?
I told him it was a bad idea. No, I didn't. I didn't. No, he didn't want
You wanted to spend more time with him, I understand. Yeah.
He didn't want to fly. I also think part of it was his management made him a very glamorous person. They said, when you go and do things, go to the best places and be seen in the best places and do that and blah, 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 blah. So it was a bit of both, him not wanting to fly and having these dramatic entrances into ports and stuff like that. So I must say I didn't dissuade him. But no. So you're quite right. We didn't gig in Paris. We went after we'd finished the Japanese tour. The band flew home, and we sailed to a port called Nahodka, and Nahodka was just near beyond Vladivostok, which was then a military zone, and we weren't allowed to sail from there. So that's where we went. And we got on a beautiful, beautiful train, Tsarist train, all woodwork and velvet, and I think the toilet had a rope that you, a silk rope that you pull, and we thought, this is going to be wonderful. We're going to be treated like kings. Wonderful restaurant, but it was only overnight. We got to, I think, Khabarovsk or something like that, and got on the real Trans-Siberian Express, which of course was all plastic and formica and different. But it was fine. I mean, we travelled well. People travelled really badly on that train.
Right.
People slept on the floor. So
depending on the class of the train, probably.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. So I wanted to ask you, by this time, 1973, David Bowie was already conceived as a star both in Japan and in Europe, but of course not in the Soviet Union. Actually, no one had ever heard of him. And I was reminded of a remark by him in the documentary David Bowie, The Last 5 Years, by Francis Whately, where he says that he was actually very frightened about this overnight success, and that he sometimes felt that he was constantly living in a luxurious mental hospital. So did you sense that at the time, but also did he feel that the travel through the Soviet Union was a kind of escape from that mental hospital because no one recognized him?
You've hit on a good point there, because he'd been trying for years different angles to be successful, and all of a sudden he'd come across something, a formula that really worked, and the management as well was quite aggressive management, and he was catapulted into stardom quite quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Within a couple of years. So in many ways, the traveling was able to kind of arrest things and give him time to breathe and regroup. So in many ways, it was good for him. Also, it was inspirational in many ways, because the journey of the Trans-Siberian Express, in part, was quite educational in a worldly way. It's and Japan was even more alien, if you like, completely alien. So these experiences certainly fed into us, and I can't give you an example because I don't know. I never talked to David about music, even though I co-wrote a couple of things with him along the way. I never discussed music, or I never discussed his ideas or asked him about this, that, and the other. We were just mates, you know, so our friendship was built on humor and laughter. But right. I think those journeys things when you take journeys, go in, even if you don't recognize they're going in. So I think they were extremely constructive in his development as an artist.
Right. Yeah. So you spent one day on the first train, then a whole week from near Vladivostok to Moscow. You also spent a few days in Moscow. We'll get to that as well. I'm curious to hear how people in the Soviet Union, first in the train, responded to the two of you. Also, if you look at your pictures and you see David Bowie with his orange vest and or yellow vest, orange trousers, platform shoes, orange hair, that must have been a kind of visual magnet, I assume.
I think it's so bizarre and so out there that people were actually afraid to approach us. Mm-hmm. So people just looked at us and stared at us because we looked so freaky. And I think that's probably what saved us. The only people that spoke to us were kids. And kids don't have that fear of people. They haven't learned to be afraid. So kids would give us badges, which I still have. And we may give them chewing gum or whatever we had. But adult people were just too freaky to, we're just like, what?
Right.
Which kind of saved us in a way, because no one really bothered us.
Yeah, but then on the other hand, there's one photo in the exhibition where you see David laying in bed with a lot of empty bottles next to it. And that was, I think, after a more or less wild evening of drinking and maybe singing with some of the passengers on the train, right?
Yeah.
So that happened as well.
It did. Yeah. It was more sociable than wild. There were other tourists. There were European tourists on the train, and we met some young Russian conscripts, soldiers, one evening, and they were really friendly. They were really sweet guys, quite young, and they were tattily dressed. They weren't their uniforms were quite tatty. And when we started drinking with them, and when you sit down and drink with people, even if you don't speak the language, there is communication somehow. It gets through. But these guys were basically, we discovered in the construction unit of the army, which basically mean they were navvies, they were basic workers, building and whatever. But they were eager to know what was going on in the West, and you know what music was and what we were listening to and whatever. They were sweet people. I found the ordinary Russian people. We were there in 2018. I did a show in St. Petersburg. I found them perhaps more like the English than as much like English as any other European, perhaps more.
Right.
Yeah.
Were there any impromptu songs being performed on the train by David?
There was a very cheesy and bad tape being played that went round and round. It was like Muzak, and it was the Russian performance of Beatles songs, and it was funny because they sung with a heavy Russian accent in English, and I remember our favorite track, me and David, and we used to join in with it, was a track called Ubla Di Ubla Da, and there's a section where Molly has a da da in the marketplace, da 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 da, and they sang money said da da da, I lick your face, which should have meant I like your face, but they sang it as I lick your face, or I lick your face, and we used to join in that bit. That was our entertainment part of our entertainment on the Trans-Siberian Express. But
Right.
it was
maybe that also colored their view of the West, licking faces. I wanted to ask you, because in the Soviet Union at the time, in every train carriage, I think there was a supervisor or someone who had to keep an eye on all the passengers. And in your case, there was, I think, as you described it, a rather dismissive lady in charge, or dismissive at first. But there is a beautiful story how you and David got to turn her around. Can you share?
She was rather stern. I think her name was Danya, but she was rather stern, and she probably thought when we got on the train that here's trouble. So David had been given a giant teddy bear from a fan in the docks in Yokohama dock, where we left, where we sailed from, and he gave it to Danya, and she was overwhelmed. And this is possibly the nicest thing anybody had ever given her, and it's possible that she never had a toy or a teddy bear or whatever, and she was so sweet to us after that. She used to bring us tea poured from a samovar in glass cups, just like you were drinking in a while ago, but with metal holders. And she looked after us. And if we were on the platform and she thought that, that we were going to be in trouble with the guards or the police or whatever, she'd take care of us and make sure we were safe.
Amazing, yeah. When you entered the train, you got this paper which told you what you were permitted to photograph and what was not permitted to photograph. So were those rules very strict, and did you adhere to what was?
Very strict.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
strict. And of course, coming from London and being free,
Right.
we ignored them.
Uh-huh.
Although a lot of the things they said were out of bounds and that we shouldn't film. You wouldn't want to film anyway. Telegraph poles, you know, why would you want to film those? So, but certainly we just ignored it. And I'm glad I did, because I got some pictures, which now, 50 years down the line, they show you how people lived 50 years ago, and that's quite interesting.
Right.
I didn't think they were. All my pictures, I call my holiday snaps, because that's what they were. I had no idea they were going to have value 50 years down the line, especially the pictures of David, as you can imagine.
Yeah. No, for sure. I was struck by the fact that so we have in the exhibition, actually a vinyl with a reproduction of those restrictions. And one of the restrictions is that it says that you were allowed to photograph train stations, but only after obtaining written permission to do so. And nevertheless, you just took pictures of a station.
Clearly ignored that, as you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in one case, very spectacularly so, because you took an image, a photograph of the Zima station, which I think at that point you didn't know was a collective point for Soviet prisoners to be sent to the gulags. So I assume you would never have gotten permission to do that. Was there any control when you left the country? Did people look at your negatives, or was there any attempt to censor?
No, strangely enough, I think if we'd have looked like regular guys in regular clothes, it may have been, that may have been the case. But I think because they just couldn't figure us out, they just kind of left it, you know. And we did come back with thousands of rubles, which were completely worthless. And even the last time I was in Russia, we were in Russia. I had a show in St. Petersburg. I think we brought back rubles, so we haven't been able to do anything with them either. So there we are.
So it so happened that the Trans-Siberian Express arrived in Moscow shortly before the May Day parade, May 1st. And there are some beautiful photos by you, but also video footage by David Bowie of this parade. Now, what was the impression this parade made on the two of you?
We didn't know really what to expect. There were quite a lot of French people there for some reason. I think communism was quite big in France. It was a bit, so there were a lot of French paper flags waving. We couldn't figure that out. Again, we probably shouldn't have been filming or taking pictures, whatever. I kind of wish sometimes I'd have taken more pictures, but then I'd have probably been a nuisance. I was never in David's face going, "Oh, can you smile?" You know, whatever. I just took pictures just willy-nilly, that, you know, whatever. So, and I think that's why I was never in the way, or it was not something that he ever said, "Oh, do you mind?" You know, whatever. But it was okay. I mean, we took David took some pictures of the processions, and I took a few pictures. It wasn't anything that we thought was incredible or whatever, or exciting, but for Russians, that's a big day for them. So I suppose that would have been, you know.
Yeah. Well, the pictures look pretty amazing. There is, among other things, this what I think is a model of the Sputnik that was carried along. So it all looked
quaint, though, isn't it? Really, it's quaint.
Right. So Another interview that is quoted in Francis Whately's documentary is where a reporter asked him, did you always want to be a star? And then in his answer, he said, well, actually, I do it for practical reasons now, but I do it to get off and will be able to do other things. And was this a topic that the two of you discussed at the time, that he didn't just want to focus on his music, but had many other plans, ideas, and just wanted to use his stardom as a kind of tool to be able to do those other things?
No, it's funny because a lot of people ask me that, how he felt about this, how I felt about that. But really, our relationship was based on humor, and I think that's why we like being around each other, because we weren't serious, and I would never say, "Where's this going? You know, what are you doing?" and whatever. I just took it for granted that he might be interested in filming, or he might be interested in this or that. So we just kind of quietly got on with stuff, and you know, it didn't occur to me to put myself into a position of saying, "Can we write a song?" or "Can I take this picture?" or "What are you thinking?" or what are you going to do next, or whatever. I just took it for granted that he was interested in film. For a while in New York, I remember later on, he was interested in the process of making a film, and the process of filming, and what it entailed. He was interested in everything. He had interest in everything creative and all aspects of creativity. And I think a lot of it was because he wanted to understand not only what he could do and what he may do, but but how he could use it for what he was doing. So, for example, lighting. How could he use lighting to enhance his shows? How could he use staging? So a lot of it was practical use. His thirst for learning other things.
But he also, I mean, of course, he was also a writer. He was a painter. He very active as a painter. He acted in a movie. Actually, in 1975, he did The Man Who Fell to Earth. And I think you were very close to him also at the set, right? And part of the process.
Yeah, I just hung out with him because we were in Los Angeles. He had a dispute with his management. When he realized that he didn't co-own the company, that his management company. He was actually an employee of the company. Right. So basically, that was a very hard time because he was trying to split from the management, and there was a lot of legal stuff going on. So it was quite heavy. So the film, where myself and his assistant Co, who took care of his business, and his driver Tony Macia, who's a lovely guy, we kind of went off to Santa Fe, Albuquerque, and we lived a really healthy and interesting life when he was doing the film. He was a shoe-in for this film because he looked mysterious, and he was absolutely the only guy that could play it. So that was a really good and relaxed time. I forget what your question was, you. Sorry. Am I answering the right question? Or am I
No,
making...
you were. Yeah, so it was about being around when he when he did the film. And actually, I have a follow-up on that, because The Man Who Fell to Earth seems so in tune with the fact that so many songs throughout David Bowie's career are related to space travel. And I wanted to ask you, do you know why that is? What attracted him so much in thinking and writing about space?
Hmm. He liked he liked the unknown, because you could theorize on that. Stuff that you knew to be factual was kind of done and dusted. That was almost mundane because it was. So he liked the unknown, the mysterious. That appealed to him. You know, stuff that he couldn't answer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something he always loved. Someone asked me a question today, and it was like, I think it was a Spanish newspaper, El País, and they said, what if a Martian came down, what would David, if a Martian came down, how would you describe David Bowie? And I said, if a Martian came down, I would say, where have you been? My friend was looking for you.
Right. Yeah, nice. Right. Can you tell us a little bit about your collaboration with David Bowie on a few songs?
There weren't a few, there were two, and they were accidental.
Okay, so how did that happen?
Yeah. David, I've got a great idea for a song. Can we sit down and write it? On one occasion, we were in Los Angeles, and we were with Iggy Pop, and I think David was trying to drum up some songs for him, blah, 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 and help him out because he was not doing too well at the time. And we went to a small studio, and it had a rather lovely piano in it. And I sat down and started playing some chords, probably badly. And they had a gospel kind of feel. Iggy started singing. David said, keep going. And he ran back into the control room, put the tape on, and came out and said, thank you, that's great. You know, so that was the birth of one song. Another time in London, I kind of gate crashed his house. I had nothing to do and no one to play with, so I thought I'd go and annoy David. And he was writing a song on a little piano upstairs, whatever. So I made some coffee, we sat down and started talking. And then I started playing this little thing that I'd been kind of fiddling around with. And he went, play that again, play that again. I played it again. And he learnt it, and then came with a chorus of when you rock and roll with me. So that's how that happened. So complete accidents. I would never have.
Right. Which is why you chose that for the title of your book, David Bowie, Rock and Roll with Me. Yeah.
It could have been Turned Blue, but it was the other.
Nice. Yeah. So Geoff, can you tell us a little bit about what's happened in your life after 1976, after you stopped working directly with David? Yeah.
I was drinking in a pub in Beckenham, where David had something called the Beckenham Arts Lab. And it's something that just before he made it, he created with a lot of other people, creatives around. And it was art and it was music and blah, blah, blah. And there was they'd meet once a week in this back room of this pub, and they'd play whatever new songs they had or whatever. He played, I'm sure, Space Oddity a good few times there. Anyway, I met this guy at the bar. We started talking, and he said he was in a band, and we started writing music together, and with me as the singer. And then when we'd done that and got a few advances, the money ran out and nothing really happened. So I said, let's start a production company. So we started a production company, and we did high-end advertising in the end, films, TV, And it was glorious because we used to get this incredible films that may have cost $1 million to make, say a minute, and they would do a 40-second, 30-second cut down. Right. And they were incredible. They were mini movies. And we were discovered that we were really brilliant at doing it. So we would do that in London, and then we get flown to Los Angeles or New York to do the same thing. And we were, at one point, the best in the world at doing that thing.
Right.
But I did. I really enjoyed it because you could make good money without being known. And work on fabulous stuff. So that's what I did for 20 years.
Right. Wonderful. Yeah. So we are almost moving to the Q&A portion, but before we go there, I want to ask you one final question. In 1991, David Bowie got married in Florence, and he asked you to deliver a speech. What did you share with him at that occasion?
He asked me, I was on top of my game. We'd had a top 3 hit with one of the adverts. We'd done the music from it. To cut a long story short, George Michael produced it. Anyway, mixed it and produced it. Anyway, that's another story. But so I was, then the record company said, you have to do an album. So I was doing an album. So I was on top of my game. So when he asked me to do, feeling very, brave and whatever. So when he asked me to do a reading at his wedding, I said, no, I was too scared. And so I said, can't you get Eric to do it, Eric Idle? And he said, no, Eric, if Eric says something in the church, everyone's going to start laughing, because he's a funny man. So I pulled myself together and said, of course I'll do it, which I did. But it was the hardest thing I've ever done. To this day. And I've done a lot of things which have been pretty tough, but that was, I was very, very nervous. His biggest day of his life and his wife's life and Iman's life,
Yeah. Well,
I did it.
He appreciated it.
He did, and I did it well, so it was all good. Yeah, but he would ask you to do things, and you did them. So that's one thing I learned from him. You can do more than you think you can.
Yeah, that's the good thing when someone just tells you that you are going to do something instead of asking you. Yeah. So with that, I want to pick up the first question from Tom Saylor. What was the group or name of the first record you appeared or released? You appeared on and released.
With David.
I suppose so. Yeah.
It would have been Aladdin Sane. Yeah.
Right. Then here's a question. Was there a stopover in Berlin between Moscow and Paris? And if so, did it contribute to Bowie's subsequent fascination with the city?
No, it didn't. In fact, the journey from east to west was quite harrowing because it was at night. And the no man's land between the two parts of the city were bombed out buildings with just the moonlight kind of shining through the doors and battered out windows of this place. And this seemed to go on for an eternity. And everybody on the train fell silent because it was quite harrowing. So it didn't seem, and yet when we got to West Berlin, he said to me, look at this. He looked out the window and there were all these kids in Iggy painted faces and clothes. So it was like that thing from east to west. It was so, but unfortunately we didn't get off the train, but we just, they knew he was coming and they were on the platform. It was wonderful.
Yeah. And the Ziggy outfit didn't inspire him to think, oh, this is a city where I might spend more time?
It may have done. We didn't talk about it, but it may have done.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I have another question here from Gaby Madeira. Thank you, Geoff, for the anecdotes you shared. Last month, I visited Aladdin Sane in London, and I was wondering if you were involved in the making of the album cover.
Ah, no, that's my good friend Chris Duffy's father, Brian Duffy. And I said to you earlier on in the interview that David's management wanted him to be the best in the best hotels, the best chips, and that he told the photographer Brian Duffy to make the best and most expensive album cover he could make, and this was a way of getting the record company to pay a lot of money and then have to chase it up with, you know, more effort. So it was a very clever ploy, but it was a very expensive album cover to make. Yeah, Brian Duffy. Look at his photography as well. He's one of the '60s trio of great photographers. There was Brian Duffy, David Bowie, and Donovan, and they were the three huge fashion photographers at the time.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a question here from Leah Pressman. Can you give us a sense of what would make you and David crack up?
Monty Python.
It came out very fast. Yeah. Yeah, were there any other situations or occasions where you found each other very in a similar sense of humor and could make fun of things?
I think if you can imagine your oldest friends and being with people that you don't need to necessarily describe something because they get it and they get you, that's how it is. So if
Right.
you know people like that and you have those relationships, that's exactly how it was for us.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Tom Saylor asked, why did you stop working with David?
My journey was through. I wasn't really needed to go further than that. He never kept particularly the same situation or bands. I mean, they're the only two people that have worked with him a lot, Mike Garson and Carlos, I think Carlos Alomar. My friend Slicky has worked with him on and off, but it would have been an on and off thing. I really needed to get back and start my own life, really, which I'm glad I did. But I learned a lot from him and learned a lot in the way of if you just try stuff and do it, you know, don't be afraid of doing stuff.
Right. Another question by Uzi Daniel. Is there any album or song in particular that was inspired by this journey?
I think to a degree, the last album I worked on, which was Station to Station, you can feel some of that alienation, the travel, and the darkness of, say, what I described earlier, the journey going from east to west Berlin, some of Russia, Siberia, the bleakest parts of it.
Was Station to Station a direct reference to this journey, or not?
No, it was more reference from a religious point of view of going from one station to another station to another station.
Right.
So religious connotation as well, but the atmosphere and the feel of it could well have been taken from those some of those journeys.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Elaine Scott asked, when you were traveling in Russia, were there any fans on board the train?
Not really, no. There were tourists, but they weren't particularly, they were pretty square. They were pretty ordinary, but they certainly knew David. There was a French couple that we met who were I've still got the letter from them actually, to giving us their address if we were in Paris, and they were lovely. They had a can of Beaujolais wine, and I'd never seen a can of wine before. And this was in 1973. And I had one last Gitane cigarette left. And the four of us, his girlfriend, him, me and David, shared this can of Beaujolais and this one last Gitane between us. It was quite, it was pretty cool, that. So, but yeah, it was mostly people that we may have had a drink with, but not got to know.
Right. Thank you. Another question by Lorraine Petzella. Were you around David when he did the Labyrinth film? And if so, how was that experience?
No, I'm afraid I wasn't. So I can't. I think I'm glad I wasn't, because I think I'd have made him laugh so much that he wouldn't have been able to do anything. No, but I was around for all of The Man Who Fell to Earth. And we had some great laughs on that. I was standing, and I looked nothing like him. The only thing I had in common was my height. They gave me a red wig at one point, but it just wasn't working, which was great because it allowed me to have the time to take all my pictures, which I did.
Nice. Another question here. Bowie seems to have been mostly apolitical, but stuck in a train for a week traveling through a different political system. Did the conversation between you stray to politics at all?
No, it didn't. Strange things were going on back home. There was something that turned up which was very, very odd. And the Prime Minister at the time was somebody called Edward Heath. And we had, along with the restrictions you were talking about earlier, whose use that was told us what not to film, or what to film, or what we couldn't, or what we could, was a paper that said an American psychologist had called the cartoon Tom and Jerry sick and depraved, and children shouldn't be allowed to see it. And then it said, the Prime Minister of England, Edward Heath, shows these cartoons to his friends at his country place Checkers on the weekends. What? Right. But that was what the Russian propaganda was at the time.
Oh, yeah, right. So another question is, when you spent some time in Moscow, did you by any chance attend any musical performances there?
No, but David did do a quick performance on the boat going to Nahodka from Yokohama, from Japan. The crew, who had hitherto been in uniforms, suddenly changed their uniforms and got into traditional dress and did a show in the evening. So David thought that we should do something. So I had my bongos and his guitar, and we did some improvised stuff and whatever. And then I left him to it. I took one picture, not very good one. It's in the book. I have a book, by the way, that's out called Rock and Roll with Me. Just come out. And he sang Space Oddity. This was on the boat. And he sang also a Jacques Brel song, Port of Amsterdam, something like that, or which they loved. But you pointed out, use that the ship called, which was the Felix Dzerzhinsky, is it?
Yeah, Dzerzhinsky. Yeah, right.
It was named after the guy that formed the toughest regime.
Yeah, the Czech had a secret police in the Soviet Union.
Police. And that was the ship. And David found out about this later on and sent me an email and said, do you realize the ship that we were on was the ship that transported prisoners to the Gulag in Siberia? I said, on that happy note.
Say that, yeah. I have a few more questions. We'll see how many we can do before the time is up. Frankly Dryas asked, I love the story about Bowie gifting the teddy bear. Did anyone on the Russian part of the trip give anything to either of you?
We got some badges. The girl we gave the teddy bear to gave me a badge, and I treasure that badge. I've got lots of these badges. And I treasure that badge because she gave it to me. So that's in my collection. I can't think of anything else, no. No, I can't.
All right. Then I have a question. What did you guys do for food? Did you always have food or did you have to go without? I assume on the train. Yeah.
It was curious because when the train stopped at stations, we saw activity around the dining car, and we saw them dining car receiving eggs and yogurt and stuff like that, but they were selling more stuff than they seemed to be coming aboard. So I think they were selling cans of this and tins of that and whatever. So the food got a bit sparse towards the end of the journey. Started off okay, we had chicken and blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden there was no chicken left. It was, Solienko or whatever. So it got pretty grim. Food wasn't great.
Right.
When you're young, you don't care, when you're 26 or whatever.
No, sure, yeah. We are going to our last question by Thomas Tsunye. Did you have any feeling during the Soviet trip that the Secret Service was interested in both of you as Western aliens? And if so, how?
Yes, we did. We were approached on the boat ship from Yokohama to Nahodka by a couple of guys who looked for all extents and purposes to be American. They had Ivy League suits on, and they wouldn't leave us alone. They finally cornered us at the bar and started asking us questions and blah blah blah. And then they kind of asked us our thoughts on politics and why we were there and whatever. And we kind of got rid of them somehow. And we couldn't really figure out where they were from. David thought they were American, but I was pretty sure they were Russian because they had no idea who he was.
Yeah. But it was clear to both of you that this couldn't be trusted.
Oh, they were certainly looking for information and for answers as to why and how we and our political leanings.
Right. Well, Geoff, thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation, and yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I hope our viewers as well. We got a lot of background information and stories you don't hear every day about David Bowie, so I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, it's been nice to see you again, yes, and hopefully we'll meet up.
Absolutely, yeah. I look forward to that as well. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank anybody who's listened.
Perfect. Before we leave, I wanted to mention that our next online program is next Wednesday at 4:15 California time, which is an interview by our student council in the series The Political Mandate of the Arts, which is a collaboration with the Thomas Mann House, Dublab Radio, and the Wende Museum. And we will interview Stephen Levine, longtime director of CalArts, the California Institute of the Arts. So will be interesting as well, and I hope you can join them. For now, thank you all, and thank you, Geoff, and goodbye.
Thank you, and goodbye from England.